Okay, now we go to the second architect today that we'll talk about today. Very interesting son of Frank Lloyd Wright, who had the lack of fortune to have the same name like his father. And I don't think it's easy to have a father like Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, if you are doomed to have such a famous father, there is a good chance that you know you'll start to drink or to do drugs and become depressed because you'll never be great like your father, and it's truly tormenting. And Frank Lloyd Wright was often Frank Lloyd Wrong, as his apprentices used to call him Frank Lloyd Wrong, not Frank Lloyd Wright, because he was a short man with a Napoleonic complex, perhaps, and he was not shy about his sincere arrogance. So, Lloyd Wright, who was actually born will be born on the 31st, I think, if I'm not wrong. Yes, we see March 31st, but let's look first at his portrait. I like this man. Now, I don't know if he was short or tall, and it doesn't matter, but I like the expression of the man. He probably suffered. Well, he suffered also because his father left his mother and left him and left the other children because he got romantically involved with another lady. So he, broke his marriage. So Lloyd, who had the name of his father, Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., suffered. I'm sure he suffered, but he was able to transcend suffering through creativity, and I think we can learn a lot from someone like him, and of course not only from him. I'm sure it was very difficult, and I'm sure he had personality, and that personality was not spoiled by living in the shadow of Frank Lloyd Wright. So let's read a little bit about him. Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, again, it's not easy, to have the name of such a famous father. Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., March 31st, 1890, May 31st, 1978. Commonly known as Lloyd Wright. So the Frank thing was dropped. Was an American architect, active primarily in Los Angeles and Southern California. He was a landscape architect for various Los Angeles projects, provided the shells for the Hollywood Bowl, which you are going to see, and produced the Swedenborg Memorial Chapel, or Wayfarer Chapel, at Rancho Palos Verdes in California, 1946-1971. His name is frequently confused with that of his more famous father, Frank Lloyd Wright. Of course, it is confused if it's exactly the same. If you are lazy to read the last two letters, JR. Anyway, the Otto Bollman House, 1922 in Hollywood. Now, this is the house was built for this beautiful lady. I found this picture, I think was done by Edward Winston, a very famous photographer. Anyway, she was beautiful, but so is the house that this man, the son of the great Frank Lloyd Wright, built. I couldn't find great pictures. I found some, but the house still exists. But I wouldn't call this house inferior to the houses built by Frank Lloyd Wright without Junior, meaning senior. No, and it's original. Yes, certain parts you can tell had been influenced by his father, but I also think Lloyd Wright was an architect on his own, with his own ideas, and I think he was able to escape the great dangers of, dying in the shadow of the big tree. If we remember what Constantin Brâncuș said, that in the shadow of the big trees, grass does not grow, referring to the fact that he turned his back on Auguste Rodin. But Lloyd Wright couldn't turn his back on his father. He couldn't. But it was an interesting relationship because his father even employed him to design, and you are going to see the landscape around one of his famous villas. He employed him together with Schindler, as I mentioned, to run his office while he was in Japan. Yes, even he was different from Frank Lloyd Wright Sr., but you see the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright. The plan is not so, interesting in a way, but the concrete appearance of the house, I shouldn't use the word concrete because it refers to the material. The building in its physical manifestation is more interesting actually than the plan seems to be rather predictable and static, but the building as built doesn't seem to be so. Here it is an auction of the building, the view spot of Hollywood, beautiful hilltop residence of Mr. Otto Bollmann. I don't even know if the name of the architect is mentioned. Anyway, Lloyd Wright also worked in Hollywood, and apparently he ran the department of stage design for the Paramount Studios. He was very well connected. I don't know if only because of the fame of his father. No, I think it was because of his own qualities and talents and ability to connect with other people. This is a great house, the Martha Taggart house from 1922, 1924. So 100 years ago, he built this house, which is different from what Frank Lloyd Wright did. Someone who knows well the works of Frank Lloyd Wright can see the difference between what Lloyd Wright did and the famous Frank Lloyd Wrong. It's not a bad building, and yes, he had the luxury to build for well-to-do clients from Hollywood. But I think he served architecture in a distinctive way, in a noble way, and he deserves our applauses. It's very possible Frank Lloyd Wright Sr. or Frank Lloyd Wrong understood the talents of his son if he invited him to run his own office while he was in Japan, and that is for 2 years. So this is by Lloyd Wright. And very often in his works, the landscape shows care and creativity. And even here, it shows, the plants that were chosen. These were chosen by a man who knew something about horticulture, who knew something about landscape design, and who had the necessary talent. I truly think this kind of architect today would be very necessary even. An architect who is, an architect, or a landscape architect, but also a gardener, not to say, landscape architect, but I prefer kind of more modest wording, the gardener, the one who works with the plants, a horticulturalist, culturalist, it doesn't sound quite right, but you understand, from horticulture, the work with plants and for the plants, with plants is important. It's very, very important. But what is also important, I think, and I feel tempted to speculate, is that he also worked with the film industry. I hate the word industry, but with films, with people from the seventh art. So if we can combine architecture with the seventh art and with the world of plants, with horticulture, with landscape design. Just imagine, juggling with the three. There are provocations that are quite interesting. The artificiality of the film, and then the naturalness of plants. The earth, you have the earth, and then you have the projections of the seventh art, and then you have architecture in between. There are interesting tensions there, interesting contradictions. This is the only picture I found with some furniture designed by him. They are a little bit burlesque. The chairs, the thrones, they have something of Frank Lloyd Wright, but they're also different. I would have never said that these are by Frank Lloyd Wright, but they could very well be by his son, and indeed they are by his son. Anyway, back to this famous actually house by Lloyd Wright, and I'm so happy I discovered him, because I began to study him, because before I just knew his name, but I didn't study his work. I think his work is interesting. You know, 100 years ago. Yes, it was refurbished. Yes, I'm sure those who live here take care of all the plants and the design elements. Sure, because it's a famous building, and you know, only a well-to-do. In fact, you are going to see a little bit later how the you know, I'm not good at this with these words, but a very important member of the Pritzker family bought one of the houses built by Lloyd Wright. We are going to arrive at that. But if I look at this picture, I see the architect and I see the landscape architect, and they are the same man, the same person. It's clear that he loved landscape design, landscape architecture. This didn't grow like this, you know, God's way. No, here is the work of man, is the work of the landscape designer. He also worked with the great Frederick Olmsted. Truly the landscape designer or the landscape architect of Central Park in Manhattan, and Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and many other truly proteic force in landscape architecture in the United States. So Lloyd Wright worked with him. I love this picture because the architecture has dignity, is sculptural, is interesting, but so is the landscape design, and they collaborate. They are distinct, they are different, and yet they work together well, and they work together well because the same man took care of both. You see, you know, he loved the baroqueness of nature. You know, these are not, of course, these plants are probably, you know, even expensive if I am to think of such matters, but you know, they complement the building in with their own drama and beauty. Henry Bollman House, this one I only have, I think, 3 pictures. I couldn't find sometimes it's difficult to find pictures with his work, because every time you type in Lloyd Wright or Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., you come across the pictures of his father. This is the fatality of having the name of your father. But I was still able to gather images for this presentation. He is a little bit different from Frank Lloyd Wright. He's not just a pallid, you know, multiplication of his father. No. On one hand, he seems to have a different kind of urbanity. You know, it's an urban building. I mean, yes, it is surrounded by trees. You know, it's a clean box in a way, but then he comes with the landscape design around it. So you have this you know, conjunction between the richness and the expressivity of nature and the simplicity of geometry. I mean, if you make abstraction of what's going on here and here, you almost get a building by Adolf Loos. Almost. So this is something which Frank Lloyd Wright Sr. would not have done. But I think Lloyd Wright was a very interesting architect with his own ideas, and not just living in a parasitical way in the shadow of his father. The interior was, of course, refurbished. I don't know if 100 years ago there were such refrigerators. You know, you could, just like in the models of Frank Gehry, you can enter the refrigerator. And when the climate warming keeps warming, you can find refuge in it. It became a room, actually. Landscape design for the Miller House. The Miller House, an important building by Frank Lloyd Wright from his textile series. So his father, I guess, invited him to do the landscape design, and the landscape design is beautiful. 1923, 5 years before the Placid Villa Savoie by Le Corbusier was built. I was malicious now, of course, but really that Villa Savoie maybe. No, Bernard Tschumi was too malicious himself when he said, when the building was falling apart because of neglect, he said the most architectural thing about Villa Savoie is the state of decay it is in. But this Miller House by Frank Lloyd Wright, look at the landscape. I think the landscape is even better than the building. It's beautiful. It's simple. It's modest. It has irregularities. It's poetical. I think Lloyd Wright was a very good, inspired landscape architect. Very sensitive. Truly, it matters. And I truly think when a project in school is done, usually nobody thinks about what's around the building. We only think about the building. But what if you start the other way? What if you have, let's say, a plot of land and you have to do a house? And instead of starting with a house, and then if you still have energy and time and inspiration and maybe money, think about the garden, why not start with the garden? Start with oxygen, not with sabotaging oxygen. The garden brings in oxygen. The building erodes it. So maybe it's time to start with the garden and then make the building to match the garden. Right now, very few students in architecture, I think, pay any attention to the space around the building, and maybe even very few architects. We only think of the building, but I think the landscape design is immensely important, especially now when we complain about the climate change and pollution and all the rest. He did a great landscape design, and I feel it is more sensitive than the building itself, done by his father. Father and son, this is also an interesting theme. Then we have the two Saarinen, Eliel Saarinen and Eero Saarinen. Then we have Jean Tschumi and Bernard Tschumi. Here we have Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Lloyd Wright again, Jr., or Frank Lloyd Wright and Lloyd Wright. I really don't know what was in the mind of Frank Lloyd Wright well, he was wrong when he named his son with the very same name. I love this picture. You know, it's architecture, then it's non-architecture, meaning nature, and nature is not, you know, domesticated. It's allowed to be free. You know, the presence of the human hand or the human thinking or the human imagination is discrete, as it should be. I mean, I'm not at all against André Le Nôtre. I love André Le Nôtre, who had very different ideas about landscape design. But I also like very much Lloyd Wright. I do. I think he was a very sensitive landscape architect. but also a good architect. We are approaching the end of the presentation. 1923, 1925, Oasis Hotel, Palm Springs. No, actually, we still have a few more images to show. I couldn't find great pictures with this. It was part of it was demolished, if I remember, partially raised. Well, that's a more brutal word for being demolished, or I don't know which one is more brutal. This happens. What can we do? Even with great buildings, Frank Lloyd Wright himself lost great buildings because of this. Anyway, sad, very sad, when the bulldozer is trusted more than the genius of an architect who put his soul into a building. This is a rendering. It's a compromised building, but I like this picture, you know, with this entrance here. It's actually very interesting, a very interesting idea. And he used it in some other place where the opening into the wall does take place, and then at the top you have this dramatic rift, you know, which dramatizes the entrance. The Harry and Alice Carr House, 1925. He built several houses. Some of them are still functioning properly, but I couldn't find pictures for all of them. This one is not so special. Probably it was also modified in time. It's possible. Not all his works are truly great. This one, though, is a masterpiece. The John Soden House. Let's read it again. John Soden House, 1926. 2 years younger than Villa Savoie near Paris. But look at this. You know, first look at the landscape. It's brilliant. Yes, it's Baroque. It's theatrical. Nature doesn't work in this way. Here you have heterogeneous plans brought together by the will of man. But it's an artistic well. It's a sensitive well. It's also a dramatic will. And the building, just like the one we saw previously, is dramatic at the entrance. It's a box with a rift. It was cut in two, and exactly where the cut took place, it's the sculptural wound of the building, if I am to call it so. I like this building very much, and I'm sure Hollywood likes it too, because you know, they made movies there, and I find I'm an adversary of Hollywood, maybe wrongly. It's possible that wrongly, but I love film. I love good films. I love the, not because I'm a snob, but I love great directors in film. I love film. I think film can inform architecture. Well, architecture informs film as well. One of the greatest film directors, Eisenstein, studied architecture, and I think film can inform with its otherness, with its artificiality, can inform architecture beautifully. Now look here, there are very interesting things happening. Yes, this picture maybe is a little bit, maybe because of the color scheme, who knows, that blueness of the water is, of the swimming pool is alarmingly blue. But I have the feeling it's a very interesting building. Maybe the furniture is not so interesting, but I don't think, I don't know if this architect Lloyd Wright was the one who prescribed that furniture. He prescribed the building, and he prescribed the landscape around the building. But it's a good building, and it was not designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, but by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. I have a picture with some projections, because these are invited. I mean, let's not forget, this is in Hollywood, and this is a screen. Okay, let's bring in the projector and let's project the same film or two films simultaneously. It's very inviting and exciting. It's monumental. It's also domestic. This is, I imagine, from a film. It cannot be from real life, because It's just it's too good to be true. But it's interesting, really. The building is interesting, and the photograph is interesting, and it gives you hope that life can be interesting, can be, enjoyable. And the landscape and the plants add to the show themselves. He is different. The more I look, he is different from his father. And I think his work as a landscape architect helped him, individualize himself vis-a-vis his how to call Frank Lloyd Wright. Again, it's not easy to have a father like Frank Lloyd Wright. No, because you are condemned to be less, and no one likes that feeling. Look at these stones, how they are, carved. Again, this is an interesting architect, who had his own ideas, who didn't reject the theater as a distinct art, who didn't reject nature, and who didn't reject architecture. So you have the plants. We are looking at the plants. Now there is an esoteric, eso from esoteric, perhaps, I don't know, tourist, the Southern House. The Southern House, a famous house in Hollywood by Lloyd Wright. I love these plants. Of course they are dramatic, of course they are theatrical, but so is the building. Quite an entrance into the building. Now, of course, it's not for everybody, this building. It's not for proletarians. It's for people well-to-do who can afford to live like this. Here it is, a rare look inside the Black Dahlia murder house. Welcome to Hollywood. It's possible that this was a film. In fact, we could even search for it, made in this house. There are other houses by his father. I know of one of them where, films took place, and, John Lautner, also another interesting architect, special houses turned up the imagination of the Hollywood producers, and the spectacular architecture helps to sell your movie, of course. A rare look inside the Black Dahlia murder house. Murder in the Lloyd Wright house. What is projected there from scenes, from paintings? Interesting, an interesting building, an interesting opulence, because it is about opulence, but it's about really excellence, an aspiration. It's you want to escape the banality of a life that is just that, banal. And sometimes money helps, sometimes money doesn't help, but with imagination and artistry, you arrive at interesting things. Lloyd Wright home, his own home, I only found one picture, and not a great picture at all. I divided it in 3 segments, but it's only one picture. I couldn't find others. Because when I typed in Lloyd Wright or Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. Home, always popped up the studio in Oak Park of his father. So I couldn't find more than just this picture I found with his own house, the Lloyd Wright's house. And it's the same picture, but I show it different resolutions. That's all. But we still see the landscape designer. In fact, he used a vertical forest. Well, it's not really a forest because it's a horizontal building, but he placed, green vegetable material on the facade of the building. That is almost 100 years ago. And then he has textile work inspired by his father, and that's it. And now we go to another very interesting house from 1928. Again, 1928, the year when Le Corbusier built his famous Villa Savoie. But now we look at this building built exactly in that year by Lloyd Wright, the son of Le Corbusier's enemy, so to speak, Frank Lloyd Wrong or Frank Lloyd Wright. It's a beautiful building, actually, by Lloyd Wright, you know, and different from the buildings by his father. We begin with some details, but as a whole, it's a very charming and even monumental building. And interesting, another building built by this architect who is not so well known, but he deserves, I think, to be well known. This one was bought by Pritzker. You are going to see a picture of that important member of that so-called important, well, maybe I shouldn't say so-called, although I'm a little bit mad at them that they gave the Pritzker to Francis Kere, but who knows? Maybe he was the best out of the lot. I don't know. Now look at this, you know, this was obviously, you know, crafted, doctored, I felt like saying doctored by Lloyd Wright. But it's impressive, you know, this, he created this drama, this conflict between nature and architecture. It is clear that he loved both. Is the work of man and the work of God, or the work of nature. You know, when his father, Frank Lloyd Wright Sr., was asked, do you believe in God? He said, I do, but I spell it nature. So it's possible that Lloyd Wright, you know, did receive something through the blood, through the DNA from his father. It's also very possible that Lloyd Wright was not always very happy about his father, because after all, his father left his family, left the mother of Lloyd Wright. And, you know, I don't think Lloyd Wright appreciated very much this. But they collaborated later on. Pritzker, this were science, almost sounds like science, S-C-I-O-N. Buys Lloyd Wright's iconic Samuel Novaro house. So now it belongs to the Pritzker family, or to this person that you are going to see here. This young man is the owner of this important building by Lloyd Wright. And a touch of, you know, artistry in the field of landscape design. An exotic tree there. Now the Hollywood Bowl shells, we are approaching the end. He built three or two from 1926 to 1928. The first one was considered so ugly that it was destroyed. Then he built another one. The first one, the first Hollywood Bowl from 1927 was this one. I couldn't find, it was destroyed, but even the second one was destroyed. There are these pictures from 1920, whatever, 1927. It was considered too ugly. I read about it. It's you know, it's a stage for you know, concerts and all kinds of events. 100 years ago, look, for a huge number of people, maybe the Oscars would have been you know, received here. I don't know, but I don't think it is ugly. But you know, the people at that time thought so. They demolished it, and he built a new one, a curved one, and we are going to see that one as well. You see here in 1926, I don't know if he built this one. He built the one in 1927. Then in 1928 and in 1929, maybe this one was an evolution or a development of this one. This one has something of Le Doux and Boulet. There is a certain utopianism here. So from 1927 to 1929, but it has been destroyed. It's interesting though how abrupt and how huge this is. I mean, just try to imagine attending an event here, a theater performance, a musical concert, something, you know, an event. Imagine being here, you know, quite dramatic. But yes, the landscape itself, the natural landscape is dramatic. Too bad it was destroyed. Sitting for 20,000 people. Lloyd Wright, Hollywood, California. Remarkable. Here is another picture, the Hollywood Bowl in 1930. I don't know when this was destroyed. Now, the Joshua Tree retreat from 1946, 1957. So after the war, I will read something interesting here. Right now is the Institute of Mental Physics. I like this word, which was artificially produced. It was dreamed up by the British journalist Edwin Dingle, whose travels through China and Tibet led him to change his name to Ding Le Mei and found the Institute of Mental Physics. So not metaphysics, but mental physics. Interesting. But in a way, you know, between metaphysics and mental physics, there is a relationship. Lloyd Wright built the building. It's less spectacular than the word itself, mental physics. But it's still, you see an influence coming from Frank Lloyd Wright, the building from Thalies and West, the second home studio of Frank Lloyd Wright. Yeah, it's clear there was an influence coming from his father, but the landscape still belongs to Lloyd Wright. So he built all this building here, this Institute of Mental Physics. This is interesting, you know, strangely, I lived for many years in the United States. I never went to California, but it's not just about California. Maybe that Romanian poet who resides in the United States, who is actually from Sibiu, he was right when he said the most pragmatic people in the world, that is the North Americans, they could also be the most poetical or even spiritual. It's a strange combination, and I don't understand it actually, you know, that exactly when you are the most mercantile and pragmatic, you become also poetical and utopian, you know, like, you know, think about the Institute of Mental Physics, you know, mental physics, you know, but it's true, you know, and anything goes really there. It's the country of possibilities still. You know, Frank Gehry ran away from Canada to go to Los Angeles, to go to the western coast of the United States. Of course, now with sustainability, ecology, pollution, melting of the icebergs, the rising level of the seas and so on, the war in Ukraine and all the problems we are confronted, maybe the flamboyance of the North American spirit can be questioned and should be questioned. But still, you know, they stir us up. I mean, this very Zoom that we are using now comes from there. The laptop I am using, it comes from there. You know, it's this unsettled spirit that they continuously, you know, give birth to new things. The brave new world I ran away from. Okay, back to Lloyd Wright and his campus for the mental physics. Not a very dramatic architecture, but maybe this was the requirement of his, by now, half Chinese, half Tibetan client. This is a more tempered version of the Thalies and West by his father. The Dorland House, 1949 in California. Yeah, a house, maybe not very spectacular, but not totally without interest if we contemplate particularly this corner. And yes, the plants, he seemed to like certain plants, as we can see here. This is the plan of the house, different from what his father would do. 28 feet by 13 feet, living room and dining room. You enter directly into this large space from here. Two bedrooms, not a big deal. If we are to express, if I am to express myself in a rather questionable or vulgar way, I like the ceiling, you know, the ceiling and the roofing system. It makes me think of some other architectures, you know, even Louis Kahn, but this one is more flat, but still interesting, you know, faceted. You know, it's there is some fractal geometry at work here. I like this corner, and I have a picture, a better picture with it. It's not bad. The space is interesting. You know, maybe the furniture. I mean, I'm sure the furniture was changed in 70 years or so. So, a house by Lloyd Wright. I just read the other day that in Japan, they think that the architecture of Japan, which is of course very famous and celebrated, is mostly about the roof. And indeed, the roof is very, very important. And the one we will pay homage tomorrow, Zaha Hadid, probably would have agreed with the Wolf Prix, who said there are architects who are architects of the basement. And he gave us an example, Raymond Abraham. Then architects of the middle part of the building, and he gave us an example, Stephen Hall. And then architects of the roof or roofing, and he gave himself as an example, and Zaha Hadid. Here we see also the significance of the roof. The roof is the coiffure of the building. It protects the head of the building, it protects the building, but it also expresses, in a way, the personality of the building, the aspirations of the building. So yes, the roof is very, very important. Now, this chapel, and with this I end this presentation on Lloyd Wright. It's also called Swedenborgian Chapel because it's dedicated to a spiritualist movement relating to the great Swedish mystic Swedenborg. Apparently, Swedenborg, I have this quotation from Daniel Lipskind. Daniel Lipskind quoted Swedenborg, who apparently said that the more angels in the sky, the more space. So again, Swedenborg, for whom this chapel was built by Lloyd Wright, apparently said, I read this from Daniel Lipskind, that the more angels there are in the sky, the more space. So let's look at this chapel from 1951. The Swedenborgian Chapel. I have a few words about it. It's a very important work by him. Wayfarer Chapel, also known as the Glass Church, an indoor-outdoor structure made almost entirely of glass and built in 1951 for the Swedenborgian Church, overlooking the Pacific Ocean on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. The site planning and planting design express his talent, meaning Lloyd Wright's, and experience as a landscape architect. He had an embracing grove of redwoods, sequoia, sempervirens, planted to achieve this. The Wayfarer Chapel is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. When the trees that surround the chapel grow up, they will become the framework. That already happened, become a part of the tree forms and branches that inevitably arise from the growing trees adjacent to it. I use the glass so that the natural growth, the sky, this is the statement of the architect, and see beyond became the definition of the environment. Natural growth, the sky, and see, the sea beyond. This is done to give the congregation protection in services and at the same time to create the sense of outer as well as inner space. This is the statement of someone, of course, very sensitive to plants, to flowers, to nature, but also sensitive and desiring of architecture. This is how the building looked before the trees grew, and even before the trees grew is, I think, impressive. Very different from the works of his father, a chapel built for the one who said, the more angels in the sky, the more space. And here it is when the building is receiving nature is receiving the trees. It's a very nice work. Again, the one who said that architecture is about dreaming was right. It is about dreaming. But life itself is a dream. If we neglect to acknowledge this truth, we neglect the best part of life, actually, and of architecture and of creativity. Life is a dream. Yevgeny mine, as a Russian poet said, space and time do not exist, as another great Swede said, not Swedenborg, but Strindberg. Strindberg, quoted by great film director Ingmar Bergman. Since we are now close to Hollywood, we have to mention Ingmar Bergman. Yes, in Fanny and Alexander, a beautiful film which I strongly recommend to you if you didn't see. At one moment, someone says quotes from Strindberg, the great Swedish writer, space and time do not exist. Nature and architecture, architecture and nature together. Thank you.